Ladies and gentlemen, welcome on back. In this one today, we're going to be doing another top 5 zombies video. In this one, it's going to be the top 5 best boss fights in Call of Duty Zombies. Now, for this one, we're only going to be doing the Treyarch games. Now, I know that Mephistopheles exists on IW. That one is obviously like the best boss fight when it comes to zombies in general. But I'm not going to include it on this list because everybody already knows it's going to make the #1 spot. And if I included the non-Treyarch games, it's just going to be Mephistopheles, and then every other non-Treyarch zombie boss is going to be pretty much not on the list. So for this one, it's going to be Treyarch only, with the exception of Mephistopheles obviously being the #1. For this list, we will also have 3 different categories, and for our first category, it's going to be the difficulty. Now, in terms of difficulty, the boss fight can't be super easy to the point where you can complete it in less than a minute, but it also can't be ridiculously hard where it just feels unfair. There has to be some challenging aspect in the boss fight, but not to the point where it's just overboard in difficulty. So definitely really important when it comes to difficulty. Our second category is going to be the overall mechanics. If it's super simple, like Firebase Z, for example, it's not going to make the list because Firebase Z, you just shoot a still target for a few minutes, and then that's pretty much the whole boss fight. When I look at mechanics, I think of boss attacks, like does he have an insta-wipe attack, different kind of attacks that he uses, ways that you can damage the boss, like using your specialist only, things of that sort, and just the way that the map works with the boss as well. And with our third criteria, we have aesthetic. Does the boss overall look really cool and intimidating, and does the boss fight arena look really cool and fit well with the boss? Now, with those 3 criteria out of the way with, let's just jump right into it. Coming in at our #5 spot, this is going to be going to Nikolai and the Dragon from Gurod Krovi. Now, first of all, in terms of aesthetic, this is by far one of, if not the best, when it comes to Treyarch zombies. You do have the first half of the boss fight against the dragon, and then the second half you're fighting Nikolai in a mech suit. It looks really cool, and one thing that they did add in as well is when you're fighting Nikolai, it does play like the Russian anthem music in the background, which is just a nice touch. In terms of the boss fight arena as itself, it's not the best, but it does work really well with the 2 bosses that are at hand. In terms of mechanics, there's also a lot to enjoy here as well. When it comes to dealing damage towards the dragon, you have to wait until Nikolai shoots open a weak point, and then you shoot that weak point 3 times, and then you kill the dragon. There isn't too much going on with the attacks that the dragon actually does. He just breathes fire, which is okay, I guess. But when you're fighting Nikolai, that's when the real boss fight starts. He has multiple attacks. He shoots harpoons. He shoots wraps in the air. He has a machine gun that he shoots you with as well. He jumps around the map. There's so much going on with this boss fight when you're fighting Nikolai. To actually deal damage towards Nikolai, you have to shoot these weak points that are all over his mech suit, and then you also have to wait until he shoots wraps in the air to open up a few more weak points. In terms of mechanics, it's really good. In terms of aesthetic, it's by far one of the best. The only problem that I do have with this boss fight is the difficulty. If you bring in the Ray Gun Mark IIIs with in plain sight, you can destroy this boss in a couple of minutes. If you bring a death machine, you can destroy him in a couple of seconds. It's really, really easy in terms of difficulty, and it can be cheesed really, really easily as well. So for that, I'm not going to put it much higher up on the list. But overall, it still is a really good boss fight. Definitely one of the best when it comes to Black Ops 3, and definitely one of the best when it comes to Treyarch zombies. Coming in at our #4 spot, we have the Ancient Evil boss fight against Pegasus and Perseus. Now, this boss fight is really, really similar to Gurod Krovi. You're fighting 2 different bosses. The first half is just a normal animal, and then the second half is kind of the main guy that you're trying to take down. It's really, really similar to Gurod Krovi. In terms of mechanics, I prefer the Ancient Evil boss fight more. There's a lot better things that are going on this map. You do have a special attack that the boss does, where if you stand into the fire that he shoots out with this sword, then it actually refills your specialist so you can deal more damage towards them. In terms of actually damaging both of these bosses, you have to shoot them down with just a normal weapon or using your gauntlet if you're against the Pegasus, and then you have to hit them with your specialist weapon as well. In terms of mechanics, it's a lot better than Gurod Krovi. In terms of aesthetics, it is on par with Gurod Krovi. Both of these bosses look really cool. They're really unique. And the boss fight arena is phenomenal. You're on Mount Olympus and you have all these floating islands everywhere around you. In terms of just aesthetic and mechanics, again, it's an absolute banger. There's a lot going on with both of those 2 categories. But again, it does suffer the problem in terms of difficulty. If you bring in the Helion Salvo and you have a good gauntlet and you know where what you're doing, you can blaze through this boss fight really easily with no hassle. Ancient Evil as a map is by far my favorite, and the boss fight definitely doesn't disappoint in terms of mechanics and aesthetics. If only it did have a better way of handling the difficulty, I would put it a lot higher, but since it is really easy if you know what you're doing, I have to keep it at our number 4 spot. Now, coming in at our number 3 spot, we have the Legion boss fight on Outbreak in Black Ops Cold War. Now, in terms of mechanics, this is a really unique boss fight. It actually feels customizable because depending on what gun you bring in, it actually changes the boss fight arena a little bit. It spawns different kinds of boss enemies, which is actually really cool. It makes it feel a little bit more unique, and it actually changes the gameplay as you play it more and more. Feels really cool. In terms of damaging the boss, it's also pretty cool as well. You do have to damage a weak point, and then it spawns these 3 different orbs that you have to shoot down. Really cool when it comes to that as well. But what makes this boss fight a lot better than most other boss fights from Treyarch is the timer. In terms of difficulty, it is by far one of the most difficult boss fights because you do have the timer. It makes it to where the player always has to constantly be on their feet. The only problem that I do have with this boss fight is the overall aesthetics. The boss itself doesn't really look interesting, and there's not much going on in terms of aesthetics. It's literally the Avogadro from Black Ops 2's Transit, carried over, painted purple, and then they grew it by 10 times as much. Not really unique in any way whatsoever. In terms of the boss fight arena as well, it's literally a small part of Ruka just smashed together. Doesn't really feel unique, doesn't really feel fun to play on. In terms of aesthetic, it's not really that good, but in terms of mechanics and the overall difficulty, it is by far one of the best and deserving of our number 3 spot. Coming in at our number 2 spot, we have the Dreisendracht boss fight from Black Ops 2. Now, in terms of aesthetics, this boss fight looks really cool. In terms of just the boss fight arena by itself, it is a little bit dark and you can't really see much going on, but the middle area looks really nice. I like how it's just a perfect circle going around and there's these pillars going up. It was the first real boss fight that we got in Zombies, I would say. The boss itself also looks phenomenal. The Keeper just looks really, really good, especially when sitting at the middle of the map. It looks phenomenal. In terms of mechanics, it's also, again, really, really good. It's a 3-stage boss fight. All you have to do is wait for his one-hit attack, then you drop your specialist in the middle and shoot him in the chest. You repeat that 3 times and then you're pretty much done. It's simple but effective, and every single time that he does his specialist attack and you interrupt him, he does spawn some panzers, which does make it a little bit more difficult. In terms of difficulty overall, it's not the hardest boss fight out there. It's not the easiest either. If you're fully set up and you know what you're doing, it can be difficult. You have to be focused the whole time. But if you're focused, you got the full setup, and you know what you're doing, it can actually be pretty easy to do this boss fight, and you'll most likely be able to get through it. The Keeper boss fight does really well in each of these categories, but the problem is, and why I'm not putting it at our number 2 spot, is the fact that it doesn't excel in any of these categories whatsoever. In terms of mechanics and aesthetics, it's really, really good, but it's not better than Gurad Krovi or Ancient Evil. In terms of difficulty, it can be difficult to some extent, but it's not more difficult than the Legion boss fight. So for that, I'm gonna have to keep it at our number 2 spot. Still a phenomenal boss fight, and by far one of, if not the most iconic when it comes to COD Zombies, but there is one boss fight that I think does it a little bit better. Coming in at our number 1 spot, we have the Eye of Odin from Voyage of Despair in Black Ops 4. Now, this boss fight is done really well and excels in most, if not all, of the categories. In terms of mechanics, it does really, really well. It's 5 stages that you have to go through. The first 2, you're just staying alive and you're trying to keep yourself alive, and there's different attacks that go on during the stage. The first stage, it's pretty easy. The eye doesn't really do much. The second stage, there's these ice spikes that come up to try to freeze you in place. You still have to survive. Then on the last 3 stages, you're actually dealing damage towards the eye. On the third one, you're kind of in this tight corridor area and you have to shoot the eye every time he appears out in the windows. And then for the 4th stage, you have to actually wait for him to shoot his laser on the open deck. And then for the 5th stage, you do have a one-shot attack that you have to be careful for while you're fighting him again at the back of the ship. really cool and engaging. It always gets harder the more you go through this boss fight, and it's not something that you're going to finish in like 2 minutes. It's going to take you a good 10 to 15 minutes to do this boss fight fully. Really good when it comes to mechanics. In terms of aesthetic, the boss itself looks really cool. It's unique in a way. It looks a little bit weird, and sometimes I don't really like it, but overall it is a phenomenal boss fight in terms of aesthetics. The boss fight arenas itself, you're always constantly switching to a new part of the map, so it always keeps it fresh, keeps it engaging to the player. Really good when it comes to aesthetics. In terms of difficulty, this is a really difficult boss fight, but not super difficult to the point where it feels impossible. It's the only boss fight in Black Ops 4 where even if you take in the Helion salvo, you're still going to struggle a lot to try and take this boss down. In terms of difficulty, it is on par with Legion and is definitely one of the hardest boss fights. When it comes to aesthetics, it looks really nice. I love the way that the eye looks. I love how it constantly keeps the player engaged by changing the map up a ton. I love the way that the mechanics work as well in this boss fight. Really good when it comes to all the criteria, and definitely deserving of our #1 spot. Anyways, guys, if you did enjoy, leave a like, subscribe, do all that. Leave your comments down below if you want to see me do any other type of video. And yeah, I got nothing much else to say, so peace.